Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Cookbowl Berkeley class, Savory, what's the name? Savory Bites for Any Occasion. So the idea is that these are foods, like finger foods that you could bring to a party, or, it could be a tea party, or a baby shower, or Mother's Day, or any other celebration. Because I also wanted to encourage people to celebrate together, especially around food. And so I wanted to give you some ideas of some simple plant-based, vegetable-containing finger foods that you can make. So we have 3 recipes. We're going to make deviled potatoes, which are like deviled eggs, tomato crostini, which I just realized in the samples, I forgot to put the cream cheese on them. I got carried away. So I'll make you some different samples at the end. And then some dilly cucumber bites with cream cheese. Okay. Let me change the camera. All right. So the first one we're going to do is the potatoes. So, eggs right now are pricey and kind of hard to find. And, I don't think there's really any sign of that getting better anytime soon. So this recipe could be made if you don't have eggs, or you're having a party where maybe there's people who don't eat eggs or don't eat animal products. So just another way to make something similar to a deviled egg. So I have all the produce here. And so what I did was I cooked the potatoes ahead of time just to make it easier, because they actually have to cool. So when you make this, you want the potatoes to almost cool completely, because it makes them easier to handle when you're scooping out the insides. So I also got carried away and cut them all in half already. But basically what you would do is bring a big pot of salted water to a boil, and adding salt to that will help kind of infuse the flavor in multiple levels in the dish. And then cook them until they're fork tender. So you should be able to stick a fork in it, and it should be able to go kind of all the way in without a lot of resistance, especially when it's hot. They kind of get a little firmer as they cool off, which is interesting because that actually changes the structure of the potato when it's cooked and then cooled. It forms resistant starch, which is basically like a fiber. It feeds the good bacteria in your gut. It doesn't have as big of an impact, or it lowers the impact of the potato on your blood sugar, because it's like fiber. So, we think of potatoes as being very starchy, and they are. But some of that starch can actually be converted into something useful when you cook and cool it. Same goes for rice and some other grains. It's also resistant starch in green bananas, and they kind of lose the resistant starch as they ripen. But anyway, so I boiled these for about 15 to 20 minutes, and these are Yukon Gold potatoes. So you can see they're gold on the inside, and they're light brown on the outside, and they have a nice delicate skin that you can easily eat, as opposed to like a, russet potato. You can eat the skin, but it's a little firmer and harder to work with. And they can also be pretty small and sort of egg shaped. So if that's the look you're going for, then you can do that. So I went to Berkeley Bowl, and they actually had 2 different sizes of Yukon Gold potatoes. So I picked the smaller ones, and then I picked the larger of the smaller ones. I was being very picky, but it was for good reason. So anyway, boil them, cool them off in a bowl of ice water, and then carefully cut them in half, because the skin is pretty delicate, so it will tear easily. And then what we're going to do is scoop out a little section as if it were an egg. That's where the egg yolk would have been. And similar to deviled eggs, we're going to then use that to make the filling. That's kind of like the bulk of the filling. So the recipe calls for 15 or so. So you cut them in half, and then you get 30 pieces. And I think I have about a half batch. So I'm just kind of scooping out. I'm using a mini cookie scoop because that makes it really easy. But you could also use a melon baller if you have one. I don't know how many people own a melon baller anymore, but or just a spoon. And they don't have to be perfect. And what I learned from the first time I made these was that I think the first time I scooped out the smallest amount of filling, like, maybe that much. I don't know if you can see that. And then I didn't end up with enough potato to make the mixture. But if you scoop out too much, then there's going to be nothing left, and it's going to be like the skin will be kind of flimsy, you know, so you want to just try to scoop out the right amount. And you might have a few that just didn't quite work, like, you know, this one broke, so maybe I would leave that out, and then you can use all that filling. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so I'll show you. This one broke when I boiled it, and the skin is going to come off really easily. So just to make sure that I have enough potato filling, I'm going to add that. Because the recipe doesn't have to be exact, and you can kind of adjust it to your taste too. This recipe I got from Bon Appetit, but I think I pretty much kept it the same, but yeah, the first time I made it, it didn't work quite so well. So these are some of the lessons that I've learned. You also, if you're gonna pipe the filling, then you definitely want to make sure that it's mashed up really well. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute, but I piped it through, I got a little fancy. No, actually that was for the cucumber bites. But if you want to be fancy, you can use a piping bag and a star tip, and it will create kind of a cool frilly look on the outside. But you don't want to use a tip, and I have some I can show you, that's too like close together, because some of the ingredients here are a little bit chunky and they'll just get stuck. So if you don't mash the potato up enough, that can get stuck, or the pickle relish. But I'll show you that in a second. Okay, it's almost done. So yeah, we'll just do a half batch. Okay, so we have our potato here, and we're gonna mash it. So you can use a potato masher, but this one works best on things with a flat bottom. So I'm just gonna kind of get it started here, but it'll be easier to mash up more finely with just a fork. Let's give it a try. Okay, so we're just gonna mash it till it's almost, yeah, completely squished. And then we're gonna add the rest of the filling ingredients. And one ingredient that's totally optional, because it is a little bit harder to find, is black salt. So I got this at Oaktown Spice Shop, and there's a few in the Bay Area. It's called Kala Namak, not sure how to pronounce it, Indian black salt. And it actually has sulfur in it naturally that kind of gives, that's similar to eggs and egg yolks. It gives it that eggy smell. So if you want that kind of flavor, then you can add it. But if you really don't like eggs and don't want that flavor, then just use regular salt. Okay, so the potato is pretty well mashed up, so we can add everything else now. Okay, let's see. So 1/4 cup of mayo. Let me just grab all the ingredients here. Okay, and I'm using vegan mayo since regular mayo usually has egg in it. So if you are making this for any reason why somebody, you know, if somebody doesn't eat eggs or is vegan, then you have to be careful of the mayo that you use. And I read a couple of different articles online about the best vegan mayo, and this one got good reviews. It's called Just. The brand is Just. So it's Just Mayo. They also make an egg replacement. Okay, so I'm gonna do a half batch. So normally you would do a 1/4 cup of mayo. So I have a 1/8 cup, which is the same as 2 tablespoons. So 2 tablespoons of mayo. And yeah, of course, if you don't need this recipe to be egg-free or vegan, and you're just doing it because you love potatoes like me, or you can't find eggs, then you can totally use regular mayo. That's no problem. Then we're going to use a tablespoon of relish. And something that I like about pretty much all three recipes that we're doing today is that you don't have to be super exact for any of these, and you can adjust it to your needs. So if you really don't like pickle relish, then you can just leave that out. But it does kind of give it that traditional deviled egg flavor. And as I'm trying to say that, I realized I add the full amount of pickle relish, but I'm trying to do a half batch here. But we don't have to be exact, so we're just gonna scoop out a little bit, and it's totally fine. Okay, a tablespoon of yellow mustard, so I want to use half a tablespoon. Half a tablespoon is okay, pop quiz. Half a tablespoon is equivalent to how many teaspoons? That's kind of a complicated way. There you go. We got our all-star Erica who knows the calculations. So there's three teaspoons in a tablespoon. So half a tablespoon is 1.5 teaspoons. Okay, this is a little more complicated. It would be 1.5 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. So we need 3/4 of a teaspoon. We want to be exact, so I'll just use a half plus a quarter. And of course I missed, so that's not even exact anyway. Okay, close enough. All right. That's how I like to cook, close enough. Unless you're baking, you have to be a little more careful. Okay, onion powder, 1 teaspoon. So we're gonna use half a teaspoon. Teaspoon. And then we're gonna use half a teaspoon of the black salt. So in this case, I'm gonna use just a 1/4 teaspoon. And if you're here in person, you might even start to, as I mash this up, you might even start to smell the effect of the salt. When you just smell it dry, it doesn't really smell like much, but once you mix it with a liquid, the smell will start to come out a little bit. Okay, and then half a teaspoon of ground turmeric. So we're gonna use a 1/4 teaspoon, so we're doing half. And that's gonna help give this that egg, egg yolk yellow color in addition to the yellow mustard. And okay, that's it. So just gonna stir that all up. And yeah, like I said earlier, I think the hardest part of this recipe is making sure you have enough filling. So you can see it's not a whole lot. So just don't be overly generous when you're filling the potatoes at first, because you might run out. Start off kind of just barely filling the hole that you left, and then maybe if you have extra, you can add more. So you can see that's kind of the consistency of the deviled egg filling, but yours might be different depending on the ingredients you use or how much potato you got. So if it turns out to be too thick, you can add more mayo. And if it's too thin, maybe you sacrifice one of the potatoes and skin it and mash it up and put it in there. Okay. So you can definitely just, maybe I can show you with this. You can just take a spoon and fill it, which is totally fine. But if you want to be a little extra fancy, you can create your own piping bag out of just a zip top bag. Or if you really love cake decorating and whatnot, you can use a piping bag, which is what I'm going to show you with the cucumber bites. So to keep it a little less messy, I recommend just kind of turning the inside, the top, turn it out a little bit, so it's easier to fill. And then get all your filling in there. Okay, so see that kind of becomes a piping bag, so we just need to cut off the tip here. And when you're piping, you generally want to start by cutting the hole kind of small because you can't ever add it back, right? So cut a small bit off the tip, and if you need to make it bigger, you can always do that later. So you can see that's a little bit small, but it kind of works. So I'll try to do some in front of the camera. And it does just make it neat, and it's kind of fun and satisfying. So I think it's, you know, it might be worth the extra little step. You can see, you know, that the difference between the one I quickly filled with the spoon and then this is the one that I filled with the piping bag. Okay, so I find this so satisfying. I want to do them all, but we don't have time for that. So I might do that more at the end. I find it so fun, but let's go ahead and just finish these off. So for a little finishing touch, we're going to do some paprika, which also will kind of help cover up any imperfections. So these definitely don't need to be perfect. And then I have some dill here, some little dill sprigs that I saved. I already washed it and separated them. I'm just gonna stick them on there. Okay. And those are the deviled potatoes. Oops. Just set these aside. Okay. So that's the first recipe. Let's see if there's anything else I want to mention. Potatoes are also a source of vitamin C and potassium. So we think of bananas as a good source of potassium. Potatoes are actually really great too. So they're not just, you know, a delicious carb that has no benefits. There are some benefits to eating potatoes. And there's most of the fiber is in the skin. So this is a recipe where you can leave the skin on and it doesn't really detract from the recipe at all. And kind of maybe helps it stick together. Okay. So next, we're gonna make the tomato crostini. And I made a little bit too much earlier, so I'll just kind of show you what it's gonna look like at the end. So you can use whatever kind of tomatoes you like, but I like to use the cherry tomatoes. And if possible, I like to get the variety of colors because I think it looks pretty. And I think it just holds together a little bit better because you have like a higher skin to flesh ratio, whereas like the big tomatoes are really juicy and kind of messy. So let's see. The first step, actually, the first thing you would do is to make the crostini, which you can also just buy bread like this already made. I found some at Berkeley Bowl that was made by, let's see, I think it was Semi Freddy's, and it was called Super Garlic Crostini. It had a lot of garlic in it, and it was so good. And it was easier than making yourself, but it's also not that hard to make. So first you'd preheat your oven to 400 degrees to make the bread. And then while the oven is preheating, then you would make the dressing for the tomato mixture. So the filling has shallots, garlic, and vinegar. Let's start. So we need we're gonna do a half batch of this as well. Okay. So normally we would do 2 cloves of garlic or 2 teaspoons. So we're just gonna do 1 little one. And I'm just gonna mince it up. We want everything to be minced up pretty fine so that everybody gets a little bit of garlic in each bite. And it is raw, so you know, raw garlic is pretty strong, so nobody wants a big chunk of garlic. Okay. Throw that in there. And then for a shallot, I had one that I used earlier. This is about a 1/4 shallot, and we need 2 tablespoons, or for a half batch, we need 1 tablespoon. So I'm just gonna kind of make some cuts lengthwise. And then we want it to be pretty small, so I'm just gonna dice it or mince it pretty fine. little messy. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna estimate that's about a tablespoon. Yeah, another recipe where you don't really have to be exact on the measurements. Okay, and then we're gonna add the vinegar. So for this one, we're using red wine vinegar. So you'd normally do 2 tablespoons, so we're gonna do 1 tablespoon. My measuring spoons are magnetic, so they stick together. And the vinegar is what gives the recipe that zesty flavor, that kind of the bite, the sourness that I think makes it really interesting and delicious. Okay. I'm just gonna kind of mash up the shallot to separate the little bits. And then we're gonna add olive oil, salt, and pepper. Okay, so for olive oil, it's 1/3 cup. We're doing a half batch, so that is a complicated measurement, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So there's 4 tablespoons in half a cup, 4 tablespoons in a quarter cup, 8 tablespoons in half a cup, maybe about 6 tablespoons in a third of a cup. So I'm going to do 3 tablespoons to do half. Okay, 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. And a teaspoon of salt. So I'm gonna do half a teaspoon. And this recipe I actually got from my aunt, and she sent it to me in kind of her own format. And then I looked it up just yesterday and realized it was from Barefoot Contessa, which is like her favorite cook or favorite chef. So I should have known. So I had to give credit to where the recipe came from. But I did adapt it a little bit. The original recipe uses whipped feta instead of cream cheese, which I think the feta cheese is whipped with cream cheese. So if you like that, then you can do that way. But I will say that feta cheese is very salty. So maybe don't add salt to the tomato mixture, and just be mindful of salt and taste things first before you add any more salt. Okay. Okay, salt, pepper. Okay. So that is ready to go. And then we're going to normally do 2 pounds of cherry tomatoes. I think in the interest of time, I'm not gonna make you watch me cut this entire container of tomatoes, but you can see what it's supposed to look like at the end. So some of these cherry tomatoes are a little bit larger, so I might cut them each tomato into 8 pieces just to make it a little bit more manageable. Some of them I might just cut into 4, and some of them I might cut into half. So kind of up to you what you want the consistency to be and the size. But I'll show you how it will look with a couple different colors. Okay, so we're just gonna pretend I cut up the whole thing. So we're gonna mix that in. And then we're also gonna add some basil, some fresh basil. And you can really cut it however you want. You can just chop it up if that's easiest. But I'm also going to show you how to do a chiffonade, which is often used to cut herbs or other leafy greens. So what you do is you just pick off the leaves. You know, some herbs, you can eat the stems. They're not too tough and don't have any bitter flavor or anything. But basil is one where, you know, the stem is pretty thick and the leaves are so delicate and nice. You don't really want a whole lot of stem in there. So we're going to separate it. Whereas the dill that we're using, you know, the stems are thin, so it's not as big of a deal. So I'm just going to stack all the leaves neatly on top of each other. And then I'm going to roll it up nice and tight. So it forms a little leafy roll. And then I'm just going to make cuts this way, pretty thin. And it's going to create these little ribbons. And it just has a fancy name. So if you want to impress your guests for your party that you're going to have, now that you know all these recipes you can do, You can say, oh yeah, I chiffonade. I don't know if it's really a verb. I chiffonaded the, maybe not. Say I cut it into a chiffonade. So then you can use your fingers and just kind of separate it and you get these nice little ribbons of basil. Okay, so the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons. That's probably, 2 to 3 tablespoons. So I'm gonna throw in a little bit of it. And then I'll save the rest for the garnish afterwards. Okay, so that looks a little silly because there's not that much tomato in there, but this is kind of how it will look once it's all ready to go. In the description for this class, I wanted it to be about foods that you could have for a party, but I don't want it to be exclusive to parties only. I want it to be practical things you could make more regularly. So I have made something like this and I just kept it in the fridge for a few days. And maybe I didn't bother to make the little toast. I just, would toast a whatever slice of bread and put the cream cheese on and eat it as a snack or part of my lunch. So you could also make it in that way. Or you can make the dressing and maybe cut up the tomatoes fresh. So, because tomatoes do get a little bit mealy in the fridge, which is why they should be stored at room temperature and not in the refrigerator. That's a fun fact. So you could also make it that way and it'll have a slightly nicer texture. Okay, so then for the bread, again, you can buy crostini already made, or you can make your own, and it's not too hard to make your own. And for this recipe, we're going to use baguette. And I actually had to look up what is the difference between bruschetta and crostini. Does anybody know? Okay, and I don't even know if I know after reading different websites, but it sounds like crostini uses baguette, so small bite size, whereas bruschetta is often bigger pieces of bread. That was what I gathered. So I don't know if that's exactly. I didn't spend too much time researching it, but that's what I read. So I used most of the baguette already, but I just cut it into slightly diagonal pieces so that it can fit a little bit more on there. But if you want smaller, almost bite size, you can cut your bread a little bit smaller, whatever you want to do. So just cut it into about 1/2-inch pieces. And then we're just going to brush it with olive oil. So what I do when I brush things with oil is I put the oil into a little dish. And I have a silicone reusable brush that's easy to clean and just brush it on there. So it gets a nice thin coat easily. So if you don't have a brush, you could maybe just use your hands or put them all on a baking sheet and do a quick drizzle, something like that. But brushes do come in handy sometimes. So pop those onto a baking sheet and bake them at 400 for 6 to 8 minutes. And just watch them carefully as it gets close to the end. They can go from almost done to burnt really fast, and that would be such a shame. So keep an eye on it. And just one side. Yeah, so if you do just one side, it'll actually get crisp on the other. What's the thing they do on those Instagram videos? They scrape it with a knife to show how crisp it is. So that is crisp on both sides. Okay. So then when you put it together, what I forgot to do for your samples, and I will have plenty more so we can fix that later, is actually put a little bit of cream cheese on each one before you put the tomato, but you can also skip it. So I did kind of want to show you how you could make it either way, but the cream cheese that I'm using is actually vegan, and this one is from Trader Joe's because I also looked up what is the best vegan cream cheese. And, there's not really a consensus, but several websites said that the Trader Joe's one was the best tasting and most spreadable. But I think there was a brand called BioLife. I'm not endorsing any of these, but just saying what I read. BioLife seems to be pretty good too, but everybody has their own preferences. So let's use some of this mixture that we already made. And the cream cheese, these tomatoes are round and they like to go rolling off. So I feel like the cream cheese also helps keep everything in its place. You can push push it down a little bit, and then put a little extra basil on top. And as the final topping, you can skip these if you don't like them or they're too expensive. But these are pine nuts. I bought them already toasted. So just a few pine nuts on top. Kind of give it a little bit of crunch and a little bit more of that buttery flavor. I'll hold it up for the camera. There's your little tomato crostini bite. Okay, so that's that one. So we already got 2 down. And now we're gonna do our last one, which is honestly probably the easiest. I think the potato one is the most complicated. But I also wanted to talk real quick, just a little bit more about the tomato crostini. So does anybody know when tomatoes are in season? Yeah, summertime pretty much. So around here, we have pretty mild weather. They might start to be available fresh and local in May even. So it's still a little farther away, but I wanted to give you things that you can preview now and maybe just let it sit for a couple months. And you're like, oh yeah, I should make that tomato recipe. So this recipe will be even better in the summertime. But we don't really have cooking classes in the summer, so I got to show you the stuff ahead of time. But tomatoes have fiber, some B vitamins, iron, potassium, and a decent amount of vitamin C. So we all know tomatoes are tasty and nutritious. Okay, the last thing we're going to make are the dilly cucumber bites. So this is another cream cheese recipe. And I'm just going to use cream cheese, but you could mix in anything else creamy to get the right consistency if you want. So what I ended up doing for the samples was I added some of the vegan mayo. If you are making it vegan with vegan cream cheese, the consistency really differs, so you might need to adjust based on what brand you're using. But it could be mayo, it could be if you do eat dairy, it could be plain Greek yogurt or sour cream. So just mix in a little bit at a time until you get the right consistency. And when I was originally testing this recipe, I was thinking I was going to do like an open-faced cucumber sandwich because I have memories of my mom making that for parties, or like maybe me and my mom had a little tea party when I was a kid. I don't remember, but and I found some cool ways to do it. But I thought, you know, we already have bread, we already have potatoes. Let me show you just an even easier version of it. But if we have time, I'll show you a way that you can make a really easy cucumber sandwich. Because I remember my mom making it, like cutting out each sandwich with a cup to make it round, and then you have all the wasted bread. So I kind of found a way that where you don't have as much waste, or really any waste. Okay, so first let's make our cream cheese filling. So we need 4 ounces of cream cheese. And most containers of cream cheese that you'll find are going to be 8 ounces. So you just need about half. So I already made a batch earlier. So I already have my 4 ounces here. And you can see, you know, this stuff is pretty firm at room temperature. So I'm going to need to add a little bit of mayo or something else to loosen it up a little bit. So then next we're just going to add some herbs. So we already have some basil. You can throw in basil if you want. You know, you can use whatever herbs you like, but to keep it somewhat traditional, I have dill and chives. So the chives here, they're like green onions, just a lot thinner. So they kind of work better in this recipe. I did make it with green onions out of laziness, and it worked fine, but it was just a little harder to pipe and kind of like a more intense flavor, I think. So we need a tablespoon of chives sliced. And I go pretty heavy on the herbs in this recipe, so if it's too much, you can always cut back or, you know, add even more if you want. That's about a tablespoon. And then for the dill, I'm just gonna kind of pull it this way, and that's gonna get most of the stem off. A little bit of stem is okay here. We don't have to pull each individual piece off like we do with the basil. But we don't really want this part of the stem in there. Okay, so 2 tablespoons of fresh dill, a little bit more. And, oh, that's not the garnish. And dill is kind of a light flavor, so you don't have to chop it really fine. You know, you can eat a whole sprig of dill and it's not going to be overpowering. So we don't need it to be too small. So just give it a rough chop. And then a little bit of garlic powder, just a 1/4 teaspoon. So I'm just gonna, whoops, there is no sprinkle lid. So I'm just gonna eyeball it, about a 1/4 teaspoon. And some salt to taste. So I'll taste it later, but I'm just got a little bit of salt for now. And then you can see when I try to stir this up, it's really firm, right? And this cream cheese has been out for a little bit, so it's coming to room temperature and it's still kind of hard. So I already know that it's going to be kind of tough, so I'm just going to go ahead and add some of the vegan mayo. I know how much I used earlier was 2 tablespoons, so I'm just going to throw a good amount in there. Okay, so you can see, oops. It's a lot easier to stir up. But you don't want it to be too soft because then it will kind of slide off the cucumber piece. So you want it to have a little bit of structure. And you don't have to pipe it on there. You could just take a butter knife and spread some of this on. But I'm also going to show you how to pipe it just for fun, if you'd like to make it a little fancy. Okay, so there you have some herb cream cheese. And when I was making a simpler version of this, also like I was saying, I want it to also be kind of an everyday food recipe if you want. I didn't bother with this step. I just spread some cream cheese on bread, took the minced herbs and put them on top, and then kind of mixed it in. So it was just for me to eat. It wasn't for a party food. And then I put the vegetables on top, like thinly sliced cucumber or radish. So if you want to just have it as a snack, you could do that. Or you could make this mixture and keep it in the refrigerator and have some sliced cucumbers, and you could like dip the cucumber in the cream cheese mixture as a snack. So that could be kind of an everyday food too. Okay. A lot going on over here. So I'm going to cut the cucumber a little bit on the thick side because we want it to hold up to the cream cheese. If it's too thin, you know, it might get kind of soggy and fall apart. And because cucumbers are, I think, 95% water, you want to dry them off a little bit. Otherwise, the cream cheese won't stick. And you also don't want to add salt directly to the cucumber slice because that will draw out the water and will make it a little bit messy. Okay. I have a piping bag, a reusable piping bag that I had already filled with some filling. And I fitted it with a star tip. See if I can show you. It's like an open star. So I don't know if you can see that. Open star. Because it does kind of have those herb chunks in there. So you might use something like that, maybe a little bit larger for the potatoes if you have one. As opposed to this is more of like a closed star. So you can see all those small holes, everything's gonna get stuck in there. So I wouldn't use something like this for that. This is meant more for like a buttercream. Oh, here's another one. This is the one that I used. What did I use this for? I think I was gonna use this for the potato. So you can see it's a little bit more spread apart. But again, you totally don't have to do that. You could just, oops, I think I lost my butter knife, but we'll use this one. You could just use a knife and spread it on there. Especially if you add a little bit of a herb garnish, it kind of covers it up. So, whoops, that's kind of a lot of dill, but it could be something simple like that. Or we can pipe it in. So if you're using a piping bag, you usually want to kind of turn it inside out. This piping bag is huge. I don't need it to be nearly this big. And it's easy to fill with a spatula, so you can use your hand. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of just squeezing it between my thumb and my index finger. Squeeze it in there. And push it down so you have it, make sure everything's down and kind of give it a little twist. So when you squeeze it, it'll come out. And I'm just going to do some little swirls. So just a nice touch, but again, totally optional. And then if you want, you can garnish it with a little bit more of the herbs. You can do, you can chop up the dill nice and fine, or I already have these sprigs ready to go. So I'm just gonna throw the sprigs on there. Oops. Okay, so those are the dilly cucumber bites. The only one that maybe doesn't work so well as an everyday snack is the potatoes. They're a bit of work, but hopefully the other two recipes are ones that you could make just for a snack or part of your lunch if you enjoy them. So I'll put that on the plate so we can see all three of them there. And cucumbers, like I said, they're mostly water, so they're not like packed with nutrition because there's just no room. They're mostly water, but they are hydrating, and it's a good way to get some vegetables in. More in season, I think like summertime, so it's still a bit early, but in the world we live in, you can kind of get whatever vegetables you want nearly any time. But they do have some vitamin K, which is good for your bones and helps your blood clot. And as well as some vitamin A, which is good for vision and your immune system. And again, the water is very hydrating. So when you're selecting them, just make sure that, they're firm, no soft spots, dark green without yellow, which tends to be overly ripe and kind of has an off flavor. And avoid them from being too wrinkly, because that means they've started to get old and have lost some of their moisture that makes them so tasty and crisp. I also wanted to mention there are other toppings that you could add on top of the cucumber bites, and that would be like a halved cherry tomato. So maybe I can even show you what that might look like. It could be, what else? Capers, thinly sliced red onion, and I mean like really thinly sliced because red onion's pretty powerful. Everything bagel seasoning or smoked salmon. So those are just a few other ideas. So for the tomato, we'll just cut it in half lengthwise, and you can stick them in there like that for a little extra color. They're very green, monochromatic. So you could add a little touch of color with some tomato and some other flavor and more nutrition with the veggies. That was everything. Okay, so those are our recipes. So I hope you will gather with people that you like around food. And I think we're kind of facing difficult times in a lot of ways, and I think gathering with your community is a good way to stay positive and feel supported. And I think is always important, but especially when facing tough times. So anyway, those are all the recipes. These will all be posted on our website, Cookwell Berkeley. We have all the recipes from all of our past classes. We've been doing this for over a decade now, so it's a great resource. Most of the recipes are simple, meant for busy working adults. The theme of this class was kind of the opposite of that, like fancy little party food. So I promise the other recipes are more like practical entrees and things, or foods that you can bring to lunch, right? And we have 2 more classes, cooking classes coming up this semester. There's one in March that will be spring vegetables, and in April, it's Earth Month, so we'll do plant-based and plant-friendly. And we offer all kinds of other workshops like yoga, dancing, the I Can program, which is an in-person month-long, 4-week program, and so many other resources I can't even think of. So if you're here today in person, we're going to do a quick raffle. So does everybody have their raffle